Her name was never written down. No statue was carved for her. She was 13 years old. She died in the thin air of a mountaintop nearly 22,000 feet above sea level, dressed in the finest clothing of her time, her hair braided with care, her lips still holding the shape of sleep. She wasn't buried in a coffin. She wasn't mourned in the way we understand grief today. She was given. Not to a king, not to her people. She was given to the mountains, and that was considered an honor. This is not nostalgic history, where we confront the past without illusion. If you're tired of polished myths and softened edges, subscribe now, because the truth, it doesn't wear makeup. The Inca Empire, at its height, was vast. It covered nearly 1 million square kilometers and housed over 10 million people. They had no wheels, no written alphabet, and no iron. Yet, they built cities on cliffs, carved roads through cloud forests, and ruled with an authority so absolute that entire villages would abandon their homes when told. They believed in harmony, with the sun, the moon, the rain, the earth. But when that harmony broke, when famine struck, when the emperor died, or when the gods grew silent, they made offerings. Not symbolic ones, not ceremonies with flowers and prayers. They gave life for life. The most sacred life a community could offer, that of a child. The Capacocha ritual was not an everyday event. It was reserved for moments that shook the empire, moments that needed more than offerings of corn or feathers. It needed purity. It needed beauty. It needed children who were considered perfect in body and soul. They weren't taken by force, at least, not always. Sometimes, the families were honored to offer their children. Sometimes, they didn't have a choice. These children would be escorted from their villages to Cusco, the sacred capital. There, priests would bless them, dress them, feed them, and prepare them for a final journey that would last weeks, sometimes months. They would be led up to the highest peaks of the Andes, not just any mountain, a holy one, a mountain believed to be alive, watching, listening. Now let's pause, because this is where most people get it wrong. This was not chaos. This was not slaughter. This was not something the Inca did out of rage or madness. It was order, structure, belief, and for the child, a transformation. To die in this way was not considered a tragedy. It was transcendence. The mountain would receive the offering. The soul of the child would become a messenger, forever communicating between the people and the gods. But still, you cannot ignore what that actually meant. They were given coca leaves to chew, enough to numb them. They were made to drink chicha, fermented corn beer, to sedate them. Sometimes they were buried alive. Sometimes struck on the head. But all of them were left alone. Alone in the ice. Alone in the dark. And over time, the cold would do what it does. It would stop the breath. It would preserve the flesh. It would keep the face as it was in their final moment. Here's where things shift, because this story isn't just about the past. In 1999, on Mount Llullaillaco, a team of archaeologists made a discovery so rare, so unexplainably preserved, that even their equipment froze up. They found 3 children, buried over 500 years ago, yet their skin was unbroken. Their lungs still held traces of air. Their last meals still sat in their stomachs. One of them, La Doncella, looked as if she had only just fallen asleep. Her expression? Peaceful, as if her death hadn't been violent, as if she accepted it. Now ask yourself, what if it had been your child, your sister, your cousin? Could you have watched her walk up that mountain knowing she would never return? Knowing that to the empire she was more valuable dead than alive? We're just getting started. What we found inside those frozen bodies, the truth about how they were chosen, what DNA analysis reveals about their final moments. It's not in textbooks. It's rarely spoken aloud. But we're going there. So hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't just ancient history. It's what happens when faith, fear, and power collide, and the most innocent pay the price. When the Capacocha children were found, their bodies told part of the story, but their blood held the rest. Inside them were markers, coordinates written in code, genetic fingerprints left behind by thousands of ancestors and millions of descendants. Science thought it had closed the book on Capacocha. It hadn't even read the last chapter. It started quietly. A tiny fragment of soft tissue, preserved beneath frost and time, was placed under analysis. Researchers expected to find clues about nutrition or parasites. What they didn't expect was a genetic map leading them straight to the children's homes, their clans, their people. Each child came from a different region of the Inca Empire, from the southern valleys near modern-day Chile to the high plains around Lake Titicaca, even coastal settlements near the Pacific. Capacocha wasn't local. It was national. A curated selection from the empire's farthest corners. When the samples were compared to modern populations, the results were shocking. Direct links were found, lineages that still exist today. People whose great-great-great-grandparents had walked the same dirt paths, spoken the same prayers, and unknowingly shared blood with a child once chosen for the gods. Some communities were told, some weren't. And for those who did know, a new kind of mourning began. In a small Andean village, one woman was shown a printout of mitochondrial DNA links. She stared at it for a long time, then quietly said, "He was ours, and we gave him away." That statement haunted the room. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't pride. It was something deeper, the acknowledgement of a cultural wound passed down like a scar. For years, these communities had lived in the margins. Now they were being told, "You are not marginal, you are ancestral." And the child the world is watching may have been your uncle, your cousin, your blood. The more science revealed, the more complicated things became. If Capacocha children had living descendants, who owned their legacy? Was it the world's? Was it the museums? Or was it the families, whose names may have never been recorded, but whose cells now echoed back? Arguments erupted. Some wanted the children buried in sacred ground. Others believed the scientific gains were too great to abandon. One thing was certain. What had once been ancient history was now personal. Then came a finding that shook even the researchers. One of the boys showed a fracture in the skull that didn't line up with ritual methods. It wasn't the soft suffocation or coca-induced sleep. It was sharp, sudden, defensive. He had fought back. This wasn't mercy. This wasn't ceremony. This was something else. A mistake. An act of fear. A rebellion in the middle of ritual perfection. Nobody could say for sure, but the theory was horrifying. He wasn't supposed to die that way, yet his body, like the others, was placed with honor. Was that compassion or cover-up? To some, being remembered is a gift. To others, especially those who never asked for it, it can feel like a burden. The Capacocha children were meant to disappear into divine silence. But fate, time, and science have pulled them back. Now they're global. They are studied, photographed, memed, named. Is this remembrance or something else? For every person who lights a candle in awe, there's another who walks away with a tight throat, wondering what kind of society raises its most beautiful children, only to bury them in the snow. Capacocha didn't end in the 1500s. Not really. It ended only when people started asking why it began. And even then, it didn't fully go. It's in the genes, the prayers, the scarred silence of old villages that still remember the names no longer spoken. The children were sent as bridges, and somehow, even now, they're still reaching across centuries. If you've made it this far, then you understand. This isn't just ancient history. It's a story about belief, about sacrifice, about what it means to honor something bigger than yourself. And maybe, just maybe, it's about us too. If this moved you, if this shook you, if it made you think in a way you didn't expect, subscribe now, because there are hundreds more traditions the world has tried to forget. But on this channel, we remember. Tap that bell. Leave a comment. Should the maiden be returned to the mountain or studied forever? You decide. Let's talk.